Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Neha. Thank you, chairpersons. So this is uveitis in the real world when guidelines are not enough. If you make a mistake, make a new one each time. So it means you learn from others' mistakes. So what I'm going to tell you over the next 20 minutes, uh, what mistakes to avoid and what are the mistakes which we commonly make. The first mistake which we make in uveitis is the delayed diagnosis. And that mostly happens that we don't do a thorough clinical examination. This is a senior IAS officer from New Delhi, 42-year-old, being treated as intermediate uveitis from all over the country, no response to a steroid and immunosuppression. He was not really referred to me, he just came on his own that I am being advised to start biologics, should I? So you look at this, it looks like intermediate uveitis with lot of macular edema, but and OCT again shows macular edema. But what was missed? What was missed were these two small little structures in the eye nasally. What were they? They were caterpillar hair. So when I asked him the history, he said, yes, 2 years back, I was on a road trip to Manali. Something went into my eye. I rubbed it. The doctor there removed some of the hair. But after that, I have been having these recurrent episodes, which means some of the hair actually went into the eye and have been causing inflammation. So what did we do? We just combined the surgery. Phacosurgery was first performed because he had cataract. And then I went in and cleared the vitreous. And very soon you will see there were two hair like structures in the eye, which were, I may have to forward it a bit. Here it is. So you can see this could be easily cut with the cutter. There was condensation of vitreous around it. There was inflammation. And the other hair was sitting somewhere in the pars plana, which I had to tease with the forceps and remove it. So once this surgery was done, hair were removed. Patient is now 4 years follow-up, no steroids, no immunosuppression, no nothing. What was required? It was just that instead of focusing on those beautiful angiograms showing the leakage, the patient required a good clinical examination to look at these hair of the caterpillar which were sitting on the retina. So, a detailed clinical examination, history, and general physical examination before ordering any imaging and labs. And in this context, I would also like to mention that Fuchs uveitis. Fuchs uveitis has vitreous floaters. There are, and I see so many patients of Fuchs being treated as intermediate uveitis on immunosuppression. So some of these confusions can be avoided. The second is the multimodal imaging. The mistake which is made is not choosing the right imaging modality. And these days we do not have color picture. We mostly have pseudo colors. And this is example of a 29-year-old complaint of scotoma. When you look at multicolor imaging, it looks almost normal. I have highlighted the area of interest, but still, you could pass it off as normal. Till the time you see true color picture, which is equivalent of clinical examination. Now, what do you see here? There is a granuloma sitting out there, which could be totally missed if you do not look the true color or the clinical examination. Similarly, if you see the multicolor picture, you do not know whether this edge is active or not. Whereas when you do the true color, you realize this is an active disease of serpiginous choroiditis. So the take-home message is that retinochoroidal imaging in posterior uveitis may be poorly identified on multicolor imaging compared with color fundus or clinical examination. So do not make your decision based only on imaging. Always do a good slit lamp and fundus examination. The third mistake which is made is choosing the inappropriate lab investigations because that can complicate management plans unnecessarily. How it goes? I'll show you an example. This is the patient who was diagnosed as TB choroiditis. Patient received anti-TB drugs and corticosteroids and she was not responding. So that's how she was referred to us. Now, if you look at this, it's a linear lesion. And if you had read your anatomy of choroid, choroid cannot produce linear lesions. Choroid is either focal or diffuse. There is no way it can produce, and within this linear lesion, there is this dark spot. So, what is this? This is fibrin deposit in fibrinous CSR. If you have a yellow lesion with a dark spot, subretinal, that is fibrin, that's not choroiditis. So I looked at the images which the ophthalmologist had taken before diagnosing it as TB. So these are the angiograms. Now look at these spots. These are small dots which are expanding in the late phase. Choroiditis is always hypo and becomes hyper. Choroiditis or retinitis is never from hyper to hyper on angiography. So when you look at this pattern, this was fibrinous CSR. This was not choroiditis. So what mistakes were made? The first mistake was to order the test for TB, which were not even required. The second mistake was that when he gave anti-TB treatment, he also added steroids, which worsened the CSR. So what did we do? We stopped all treatment, and this is how patient does. You stop steroids, stop everything, and this is what the patient responds. We published this, that if fibrinous CSC has a dark spot. Dark spot means that's the point of leak of CSR, and when the fluid comes, it displaces the fibrin. So if you see such kind of dark spots, this is more of a fibrinous CSC and not your retinitis or choroiditis. So please do not give corticosteroids because they are going to worsen CSR. So what is important? Important to know the pre-test probability of the test, which means that you simply ask yourself a question that what is the probability that the tests are going to be positive? Is the phenotype suggestive of TB? No, it's not. So there is no need to order those tests. The mistake 4 is that you choose not to order the specific lab test. It's the opposite. Sometimes there is a very high pre-test probability that it is going to be a particular infection and you don't order. So I'll give you an example. This is a young girl, a PhD student, a 29-year-old. She has a very interesting history of working on MTB lab at the premier institute of our country. She presents somewhere in South India where she is diagnosed with macular choroiditis. She is carrying on her records where it is written macular serpiginous choroiditis. No labs were done. She was treated with corticosteroids and MMF. She had recurrences. Methotrexate was added. Now this is what is serpiginous-like choroiditis because she had vitreous cells. The moment you see vitreous cells, this is not the autoimmune variety of serpiginous choroiditis. The child has a history of working with MTB. So this was the kind of the patient who required testing for TB, which was not done, and she was given immunosuppression after immunosuppression. So what happens eventually? This is the time when I saw her, So what has happened is she has now developed a large granuloma, lost her central vision, which could have been avoided had we recognized the disease on time. All investigations for TB were negative, and then we did PET scan, which showed there was activity in the parotid. So I told her we need to biopsy your parotid. She said, no, I already have a biopsy. It is Warthin's tumor. So we procured the slide. It came out actually to be tuberculosis of the parotid gland, and we treated her. We did treat her, we got the lesions healed, but we could not get her vision because somebody failed to recognize TB at this point of time. The fifth mistake is mistaking non-infectious entities for uveitis. Now, this is a 23-year-old boy. He's actually under the care of our pediatrics as IgG4 related disease. Now he says, I have decreased in vision. So I saw this. His vision was really low, counting fingers or something, both eyes. I was very confused. I said, IgG4, is it retinitis? It is choroiditis? It did not look like either. And then on autofluorescent, he had these funny lesions, like marks, like trails going on. There was no pain, no redness, no watering, no photophobia, no inflammation in the eye. And he had these lesions, We did OCT, which again was very interesting. You had these pillar-like things going on in the outer retina. I was actually preoccupied with IgG4 and looking at inflammation, not thinking like a retina person. So obviously I did my ICGs and everything, and nothing. It did not look like choroiditis at all. And then suddenly it occurred to me, oh, it looks like laser-induced injury, but that was after almost 4 or 5 days. And I asked him, and he said, yes, I had gone to Goa. He gave me this picture. I have this laser. And the other day I was waiting for my sister. I had gone to pick her up. I was in the car. So I kept on shining that laser pointer in the side view mirror of my car, and after that my vision has gone down. So this is a laser-induced injury in a child who has IgG4 disease. So of course we managed it and we publish almost everything. So we published this one also in Retina. But the take-home message is that if the disease phenotype does not align with the systemic disease, consider the possibility of coexisting morbidities. The sixth mistake which we means is the uveitis is changing very fast. What we used to call non-infectious are now becoming infectious, and we have to be aware of these. For example, we used to call things like Posner-Schlossman and other things, which are all viral uveitis now, CMV. So there is etiology for many of the entities which we always thought were non-etiologies. So it's very important to be up to date, because this is typically what a herpes interior uveitis would look like. Then there is CMV interior uveitis, and they respond very well to treatment. We have published all the algorithms on how to treat them. These are Titan reports. You can refer to them whenever you want to. But my thing is, be aware of viral interior uveitis. Don't label them as acute interior uveitis or as Posner-Schlossman. The seventh mistake is that we fail to anticipate the side effects of commonly prescribed medications, and this is very important. This young 13-year-old child was seen, blurred vision, both eyes, 3 months. You can see some lesions here. We did ICG, which showed dark spots all over. This is typically what a sarcoid granulomas would look like. She was actually found out to be positive for sarcoid. She was treated. This is how she looked like, and I would like your attention to her beautiful long hair she had. She was started on azathioprine as a steroid-sparing agent. 1 week later, she says that she is developing hair loss, but her vision is getting better. So my fellow who attended the call called her, and this is what she looked like. There is complete loss of hair within 1 week. This is called alopecia totalis with hyperpigmentation of the knuckles. You can see this. This is in 2 weeks. So her CBC was done, and of course, the CBC was even more alarming. She had TLC reduced, platelet counts reduced to 25,000, and this was a case of NUT15 mutation where they don't metabolize azathioprine commonly. So the reversal of the side effects you can see on stopping azathioprine, but one has to be extremely cautious of the side effects of the medicine. Dr. Bindu gave a beautiful presentation in the morning about the drugs causing cerebrochoroidal effusions and other things. Similarly, I'm not, even we also have these, like we have now biologics causing sarcoidosis. This is not everyday scenario, but these are generally. So you have to be extremely careful if you are prescribing JAK inhibitors, biologics, because JAK inhibitors without herpes vaccination, I have now 3 patients referred to me as on, where JAK inhibitors were started for intermediate uveitis because they did not cover for herpes. So that is a very important message, that these drugs, be comfortable with them and look for the side effects when you are. The 8th mistake which we make is many infections really respond to steroids and can be mistaken for non-infectious, but you have to do a long-term follow-up. For example, this patient, somebody diagnosed as VKH. It's not VKH if you ask me, but responded, but many years later came back as TB. I'm going to forward it a bit. And the last mistake is, if it is a surgically amenable disease, go in. Don't try medical. Don't believe all uveitis is medical. This is the patient referred to me from Ahmedabad, 46-year-old man, decreased vision. All the uveitis workup was negative. And they said they were giving steroids and patient was developing exudative RD. This is what Optas showed by the time patient reached me. It was a full-blown case of acute retinal necrosis, and you could see the retina had detached even during the acute. This is not exudative detachment. There were holes like this one in the retina. So these, I still waited for 2 days because I wanted to give the cover of antiviral, and you can see the disease is progressing. So this is the time when you just go in inside, you don't care the disease is active or not. Of course, you have to be very careful during the surgery, not pull the retina unnecessarily, PVD induction. You have to stop after some time because it is so adherent that if you keep on chasing it, you might actually, cause more damage. But you have to make sure that you have separated it nicely. You have to be extremely careful of doing laser, especially in the areas where you have active retinitis, because those laser burns are going to cause full thickness, and you can now see the sieve-like retina so beautifully. So I'm not going to, what I mean to do is, if there is something you do not understand, if it doesn't look like exudative detachment, please don't keep on pushing steroids thinking that exudative detachment will go away. It will not go away. If it's a surgical treatment, get a second opinion and get it treated. And this is how the patient appears 1 day post-op. So, patients with uveitis may develop complications like reg-RD, VMT, ERM, which are amenable to surgical intervention and which should be done timely. My favorite line, when you are dead, you don't know you are dead. The pain is felt by others. Similarly, when you make mistakes on the patients, you probably don't even know you have made a mistake because the patient goes here and there and to different person. But the pain is felt not only by the patient, but for his entire family. And what is important is that it was said in the morning also that we treat every patient as a patient, a human being, and probably we will not be able to apply whatever the guidelines are in each and every patient. And we have to not use a blanket treatment for all. Retina is different. I'm talking about uveitis. We will have to understand what this patient is going through and keep on documented, because many a times the disease itself will teach you how it evolves. With this, this is the book. We do the IUSG grand rounds every month. We did it for last year, where there is a case presentation, discussion, and question answers. It's being compiled into a very beautiful book, 400 pages of different diseases, their cases, and their global international experts. The book we are going to release in Germany on 10th of July and is by JP Brothers, so it's not expensive. So would be available for those of you interested in learning from the cases, real cases and practical insights. This would be available. With this, I would like to congratulate Team Srinetra for amazing. My concept of state societies has been changed today. I always thought state society meetings were mostly for food and for meeting people and no science, but this meeting has changed my perception. And thank you, Harshali, for bearing with me, because she kept on saying and I kept on postponing due to lack of dates. But it has been truly worth coming here, and thank you very much for your persistence. Thank you.